What's the best real-life example you've witnessed of someone destroying their own happiness?
Experience 1. The young guy at work is in his early to mid-20s and is married with 2 young kids and a third on the way. This new girl at work has been after him so hard. He was seriously tempted and conflicted. We all tried to talk him out of it. Did he really want to throw away his family life for this? Do you really think this new girl is going to stick around once all the drama starts when you guys get caught? He told us all one day that he finally told a new girl to leave him alone. He was happy with his wife, and she didn't stand a chance. 3 weeks later, he was sleeping in his car because he went for a new girl after all, got caught, kicked out and served with divorce papers, and the new girl ditched him once he got depressed over it. Experience 2. My ex-friend Tom, over 10 years ago when we were teenagers, he once said to me, "I'm going to try meth tonight," whilst we were at a bar, Australian. I literally knew nothing about drugs at the time, especially meth. I just knew it wasn't good. He invited me to join him, but I said no because I had a gut feeling it wouldn't end well for me. Since that day he went in and out of prison, lost all of his friends including me, and completely changed as a person. Whilst walking with my wife and daughter a few months back, I saw him walking his dog. He had obviously cleaned himself up, but it was like 2 strangers walking past each other. I took one silver lining out of this. It made me learn a lot about drugs altogether, and it showed me a different life I could have led if I said yes, all those years ago. Always say no to meth. It will ruin your life and take everything. Edit, I forgot to add that Tom had it all: a loving girlfriend, a great job, etc. Experience 3. I know a guy who is now in his 50s/60s who got bored with his wife and kids, cheated on her and divorced her. His wife, who had always supported him because he just couldn't hold a job down, started a business and became a multi-millionaire. She also got remarried to this amazing guy who is a major step up from her husband in every aspect. The guy then married this mail-order bride from Indonesia. As soon as the 3 years she had to stay with him to get permanent residency were over, she left him and married his richer cousin. I sometimes get invited to family events and see him there by himself, broken, with none of his kids or family members wanting to talk to him. Experience 4. My sister was offered an incredibly well-paying job doing something she's great at. She decided it would be too easy and opted for a far more challenging job in a far less appealing setting with an asshole of a boss she was hoping to impress. She's freaking miserable now. I honestly don't get why she does this sort of crap to herself. Experience 5. My dad threw out a 15-year marriage with a woman he adored because he got drunk and screwed a random coworker. He's utterly miserable now. Experience 6. My ex is weirdly the reverse of this. Together we were miserable, there was nothing good about that relationship. He ended up cheating, among other creepy behaviors, and we split. For a while it really seemed like everybody was better off. He seemed happy to be with his affair partner. I was just thriving being single, and the kids were much happier because it turns out a home with 2 deeply unhappy parents is terrible for children. It was all looking up. He and I were civil and focused on co-parenting. About a year after the split, things seemed to just start spiraling for him. He lost his job in a niche field where you really have to be the best of the best to get sustainable work, and he was simply never the best of the best. He was getting by on piecemeal contracts and simply wouldn't retrain into another more stable field or even just supplement his income with something like bartending or food service or anything. His girlfriend had some kind of injury needing repeated surgeries that limited her ability to work, so he's the breadwinner on a low and sporadic income. He started to become increasingly inconsistent with the kids and would disappear from their lives on and off, so they, being children, turned more and more to me for stability. His views became increasingly alt-right and anti-science, which in my opinion just makes you an angry, disconnected person who thinks society is persecuting you. And also, it turns out I had all the financial sense in the relationship and did all his life admin, and he doesn't know how to do a lot of basic crap like refinance loans or do taxes, so there's been this long list of totally avoidable financial near disasters occurring because he didn't do X, which would have prevented Y. Or comes to me asking for money. After all, he's taken out payday loans and surprise, the interest is brutal. I learned my lesson there. I don't help him with money now. Meanwhile, I'm doing great, my kids are doing great, they like spending time with him but don't really see him as a person to turn to for support or comfort. I look back on that first year and he seemed happy, and I'm at a bit of a loss for how it's all gone to crap for him in the years since. Experience 7. Oh man, my ex-girlfriend from high school. The valedictorian of our class, super smart, came from an awesome family. I'm still friends with her sister and mom. Totally just dropped out of college, moved to Baltimore and smoked crack for 15 years. Has a bunch of kids and is totally unintelligible to talk to, it's bananas. Experience 8. I had a friend in college who had a tendency to act before thinking but was generally fun and well-meaning. After I had graduated, my friend apparently got coerced by a woman he was trying to sleep with to try heroin just once. As I heard it, he refused initially, then caved because he felt pressured. My friend overdosed and died. Just like that, one bad decision ended his life. R.I.P. Mike. Experience 9. My ex-neighbor. Nice guy, who managed a hot music venue in LA, partied a fair bit. One day he didn't have enough cash on him for coke, so he begged his dealer to sell him crack instead. The dealer told him it was a bad idea but would sell to him because that's what dealers do. Guy insisted. I know this because the dealer knocked on my door and told me to watch out for him because he was making some bad decisions. A week later, I noticed my neighbor's normally full of music apartment was deadly quiet. Went up there and found him passed out in literally a foot of garbage. Chip bags, takeout wrappers, cardboard boxes. It was like he carried all of our trash out of the dumpster behind the building and dumped it on his floor. Then his boss, who is awesome, paid to send my neighbor to rehab and guaranteed his job would be waiting for him when he got back. A neighbor broke out of rehab 2 days in. A month later, I found out he had gone back to his home, moved in with his parents. This guy was in his late 30s, and then OD'd on their floor. Don't do substances, guys. Experience 10. A good friend I worked with for years was married to a great dude, super nice and everyone loved him, just a great guy all around. They had a couple of middle school-aged kids too. I think she was going through a midlife crisis type thing, but anywho, she reconnected with her old high school boyfriend on Facebook, and they started having an affair. She ended up telling her husband about it and left him for the other guy. Her husband was great about it, wanted her to be happy, great at co-parenting and didn't want to make anything harder on the kids, etc. The old high school boyfriend was toxic as hell. I met him a few times and he was an absolute prick. They fought constantly. Every other week they were breaking up, kicking each other out of her condo, or he'd just go missing for days at a time and she'd be a wreck wondering where he was, which was usually a couple of hours away at the beach on a drug bender with his friends. He's in his late 40s, by the way. She said she got bored with her life with her husband and wasn't attracted to him anymore, but I think she just went off the deep end and wanted something that wasn't there anymore, that feeling and excitement of young puppy love, but that's not what she got. I think some people just need drama in their life. I felt like she threw away a happy life just because she missed the drama. Experience 11. My parents separated earlier this year. It was 100% my dad's fault due to being an abusive textbook narcissist. Mom put their house up for sale and he had 2 months to sort out his move. He claimed to have nothing, no support and nowhere to go. My husband and I took pity on him, and despite having a newborn and both working, helped him pack and sell off the extra furniture to get him some cash, and I found him a secure place to buy in his budget. He turned around and said he didn't want to move into the type of place I found, an over 50s village, he's 73, because he wouldn't be able to take chicks back there to smash. He then refused to leave the property and said the cops would have to shoot him to get him out of the house. When I put pressure on him, because otherwise the sale would have fallen over and they would have been sued, he threatened self-deletion, which he does absolutely every time something isn't going his way, and burned the house down repeatedly, including in front of my 7-year-old kid. Eventually, he does comply, and we move him into the granny flat of a woman he met playing pokies, slot machines, for US types, and who is apparently a millionaire from a famous family. I call bullshit, but he clearly thinks he's found someone new to mooch off. They have been at the pokies every day for months now. His money won't last long at this rate. Then, I find out that through all this, all the stress and bullcrap he put me through when I should have been in a happy new baby cocoon, he actually had an offer from a longtime friend to move in with him and his wife, and that they had a whole team of people willing to help him with his move. Considering that he ghosted them after they made that offer though, they have since decided to discontinue the friendship since he's shown he didn't value it or them. Guess what? My husband and I are also done with him. I was the last kid that spoke to him. So, he went from married with a family to living in insecure housing, hurtling towards poverty and homelessness, having burned every bridge he had. All because he is too narcissistic to accept that he is less than perfect and that he is ultimately responsible for his own life. That rant felt good. Edited to define pokies, which is Australian slang for slot machines, from poker machines. Experience 12. I have a family member who inherited around $500,000 in cash and assets when his mother died. He had a decent job at the time. This inheritance meant that he started taking longer vacations and stopped consistently working. He bought a sports car and paid off the 2 pre-built condos that his mother had put down payments on, but sold one immediately at a loss and then rented the other out for a while until his original tenants moved out, then let it sit vacant for over a year and selling it at a loss. He loaned money to his half-sister to pay for tuition at a job that would never allow her to repay him. He bought every new and interesting piece of electronics. The electronics eventually caught up with him. He went on holiday to the USA, and on his way back across the border the guards wanted to search his laptop, which led to the discovery of child explicit videos. He was also trying to groom his niece, daughter of the half-sister. There wasn't much money left from the estate at that point. He was arrested and only managed to stay out of jail on a technicality that a very expensive lawyer found. He paid mid-$50,000 for his defense. The 2 or 3 years that the criminal defense was going on, he didn't work at all. Just dipped out on his employer, who would have continued employing him. He sold the sports car at a loss. Sold his last remaining property, the condo, at a loss. Sold a bunch of his expensive toys at a loss. Ended up penniless, actually probably bankrupt, but not in jail. Now his life consists of living in a small, rented bedroom and working as a local trucker. He didn't just destroy his life, he nuked it from orbit and then salted the ground. He's currently in his late 40s and will probably never be able to retire. Most of the family won't speak to him at all. Experience 13. There was a guy I knew, selling hash oil. He'd get 5 pounds of it every month. He had a house, a cottage, a boat, a motorcycle, a 1970 Mustang, and tons of jewelry and toys. He got into coke and went from the nose to the pipe to the arm. The last time I saw him, he was whining at a street corner dealer that wouldn't front him a gram of weed because his word was no good. Experience 14. This one is rather simple compared to some of the others. But I have a friend, I guess? He's always complaining about not being able to make connections with new people, and that his 2 friends keep him at arm's length, that I'm the only person who regularly talks to him. I told him it's because he's passively mean to everyone and doesn't extend any effort into the friendships. He comes back with that their emotions are their responsibility, not mine. He can't make friends because he's a bully, and he can't keep friends because he's too passive and expects them to put in all the work, plus he's a bully and says really mean crap off the cuff under brutal honesty. He absolutely will not accept this. I told him it's the reason I won't invite him further into my life and circles either, or that one struck a nerve with him, so hopefully he will start to look inward. To be fair, I do think he's a sociopath, so my efforts will likely be in vain. However, he's constantly miserable and feeling apathetic toward life and wants more friends. He's his own worst enemy. I'm giving it another month and then bailing if he's stuck that hard in his ways. Experience 15. An ex-friend of my wife, she had a bit of a wild past but had settled down with a good guy. He had a great job and had been investing in real estate since his early 20s, so at 40, she was 30, was well on his way to retiring early. They had 2 kids together. She didn't want to work and never had. He was fine with that. Life was rosy. Then after 10 years she decided instead of him retiring when their girls finished high school and traveling the world, they should start to splash the cash around. Now, he wanted to stick to the plan, live fairly modestly now, albeit in a beautiful house, and take a nice holiday every year, and then live it up later and still be able to set the kids up. She spent hours complaining to my wife about how boring this plan was, and she couldn't understand why she couldn't just buy a Porsche right now and just live for today rather than have some vague future fun. Her eventual solution was to live out her Sons of Anarchy fantasy and start banging the Mongol gang members she met at school drop-off. That lasted all of about a month before her husband found out. He kicked her out of the house, and she tried to get the biker to threaten him, but the biker instead decided to drop her like a hot potato. The husband went for full custody with evidence she had been banging a known criminal and drug dealer. Daughters were old enough to place 100% blame on her. Last I heard, she was being kicked out of her rental and facing homelessness because she has never held a job for more than a month in her life and has always found dudes to pick up the tab, but now as a single mother pushing 40, that option is off the table. She's my wife's ex-friend because her daughters and ours are close friends, and I always got along with her husband much more than I ever liked her, so her husband won us in the divorce as well. Experience 16. A friend from high school has a brother named Steve. I used to see him a lot when I would go and study at her house. He was always a little odd, but not in a bad way. He was just rigid. Very regimented. He was studious and quiet. He's a few years younger, and I always used to tease him and call him a robot. I'd say, "Hello, Steve," in a robot voice when I saw him. He'd always shrug it off and chuckle. He did well in school and got a partial scholarship to a prestigious school in another state. I heard he had dropped out because of the stress and pressure of school and didn't hear much else about it for a while. After coming home from summer break before my senior year of college, my mom told me Steve had OD, but was saved by a passer by calling 911. I called my friend and we spoke about what had happened, and she gave me the full story. It turns out he had gotten involved with a girl who worked at a diner where he worked late shifts. This girl's brother was a dealer and somehow, with his sister's help, convinced Steve to deal for him on campus. Long story short, Steve got busted and kicked out. The family tried putting him in rehab, but he'd be back out to buy drugs again within weeks of getting out. The next time I saw Steve was about a year after his OD. I was working at a bar to earn some extra money, and I saw a guy begging for change as I left at the end of the night. It was a familiar voice, and I instinctively turned in the direction of the voice and said, "Hello, Steve." The face under the shaggy mop of hair and the hood he was wearing shot up, and his eyes widened like he'd been transported to a time before it all went bad. He was on the verge of tears and just said,
"Sadie?"
Not my real name, like a small child. I kneeled down and spoke to him, looking into his eyes the whole time. He looked broken, like he'd given up and was waiting to die. He also looked cold somehow. It was the middle of summer in the Northeast. I told him I was getting some food and he could join me if he wanted. He said that would be nice and that he hadn't eaten in days. We sat for around 4 hours, mostly in silence, but with bursts of conversation when he had the energy to speak, which usually coincided with the delivery of a fresh serving of fries. I let him talk and talk and talk. I asked some questions, but not much more than,
What made you decide to do that?
or,
Do you think that was what you really wanted?
as I mentioned, Steve was always a very rigid and regimented person. He had just lost himself. That night, he broke out of whatever mental prison he'd been in for those last few years. He looked at me with pure innocence and said,
I'm not who I wanted to be, and I don't want to be this person anymore.
and I absolutely believed him. I told him he had a long way to go and that he'd burnt a lot of bridges, but that I believed in him. I didn't see Steve for another 6 months after that night, but when I did, he was working construction. He'd been given a chance by an older man who needed some younger bodies to help get the work done. We chatted for a bit, and he seemed to be clean and sober and doing well. He was back and living at home. I told him I'd see him again when I came home for the holidays. Christmas time and I'm back home. I'm still taking some shifts at the bar, and a few days before Christmas, Steve walks in. He looks great. He's still clean and sober. He waves and sits down at a table in the corner, and I go to take his order and chat for a few minutes. This is when I realized I had underestimated Steve. He didn't just get a job working construction for some old guy. Steve had planned out the most efficient way to get back everything he'd lost, except time. He worked out the old guy was the only builder in a few counties that did some certain type of building restoration work that was kind of lost to modern practices, and specifically targeted him for a job. He learned everything he could, and when the old guy retired, Steve bought the business from him. It was only a small operation with a few employees, and the guy's daughter was a nurse and had no interest in taking over the business. A few years have passed, and Steve is doing very well for himself. He's not a millionaire or anything, but he's still clean and sober. He's grown the business, trained workers, taken a step back from day-to-day operations, restored an old house that he now calls home with his girlfriend, and is beaming with happiness whenever I see him. I do not doubt in my mind that Steve will never touch a drug again in his life. Steve is rigid. Steve is regimented. I'm so proud of him. Experience 17. He was miserable at a data entry company in Texas. I encouraged him to apply for his dream job at a company that was out of state. I told him if he gets the gig, he can figure out the move over there and he'll be making enough to move his girlfriend and her 2 kids. I said that of course it'll be a difficult move, but he has to follow his dreams and passions. Well, they made him an offer above what he asked for. I remember the day he got the news. He called me crying, and I cried because I was so freaking happy for him. He deserved it, and he is a good person. His girlfriend was absolutely not okay with it, and she said he only supported him when he applied because she didn't expect him to get an offer. She threatened to break up with him and even accused him of abandoning his children and forcing the children to be raised without a father, even though they weren't his children. They had only been dating a year, and her kids were 8 and 12 at the time. He finally gave in and turned down the offer. I was so disappointed, and I was upset with her. She called sometime later and yelled at me for getting his hopes up, even though I supposedly knew they would be a problem with her. She also accused me of trying to get him to break up with her. After that, he and I hung out less and less till finally, communication stopped altogether. About a year later, he sent me a message saying that he hated me for putting him in that dilemma. That honestly hurt the most. That was about 20 years ago. He's still at the same data entry company, and he got his first promotion. He's now a senior software engineer after being stuck with the junior title for 20 goddamn years. Anyway, the company he wanted to work for was Boston Dynamics.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.